Hey everybody, CNOTE here, and welcome to the CNOTE Audio Extravaganza. This is your host, Mr. Christopher Rivera, bringing you the show that is like Hurricane Irma, a direct hit. Too soon? That's not funny. No, in all seriousness, if you are in Florida, you should probably not be in Florida. If you are staying in Florida, I hope it's because you have a very, 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 very fortified bunker. I hope everything's going well. I hope I can at least provide you some entertainment during the madness. I always think of the movie Twister, when there are crazy hurricanes and crazy storms and things coming through. That movie's so good. But also, frightening. That's sort of like natural disaster stuff. Like, I think it's easy to take for granted that everything is fairly normal on Earth. There are planets that have, all planets that we know of so far are inhabitable and have, crazy stuff going on. Hundreds of years storms going on. So, when we get these superstorms, I think we definitely take our planet for granted. And that's a bigger picture thing that is a very frustrating reality that we live in. But the best we can do is try to help each other through these major events. And if you're able to offer shelter to someone, please do. These are humans. These are people. Everyone needs and deserves a chance at making it out alive. So, with all that heaviness out of the way, because it's life. It's true. And that's part of actually what I'm dealing with work is there is a video that I'm doing. One of the videos that I'm doing is focused on bridges across America, and basically it's like wide shot of a bridge, then a city or a hospital in that city, and then shots of people bringing in food and taking care of each other, and also discussing the different healthcare challenges that different parts of the country are facing. So that kind of heaviness is what I'm kind of living in for the next few days, trying to piece together a lot of these clips and get a coherent video going out of it. So I'm pretty excited to be a part of that. It should be interesting, and hopefully I can tug some heartstrings and motivate some people to do big things in terms of healthcare, and hopefully be able to help people to mobilize more efficiently when these natural disasters happen. So that's kind of the goal, and pretty honored to be a part of that. So that's pretty much the bulk of what's going on in my life at the moment. I got some sleep last night, which I'm pretty excited about. I'm still a little behind on the sleep, but I'm feeling better than I did yesterday. We'll see how the second half of the day goes. And I don't know, I just woke up feeling fairly good and wanting to be healthier. I felt like I wanted to I need fruits and veggies and good things for my body, and to do physical things and take care of myself, because I've been kind of letting myself go for quite a while, and it's time to fix that. I'm starting to feel a heaviness that I don't really appreciate. So I think it's time to really, really hunker down and make a longer shift. Anyway, today I was kind of going between two topics, but I guess I'll just pick one at random. Stoicism. Okay, let's talk about that. Because I've been reading a book about the Stoics, called something about the art of Stoic joy. Living the good life, something like that. It's like living the good life, the ancient art of Stoic joy. Which is fascinating, because the Stoics are an interesting type of people, philosophers. They don't really exist today. I mean, some people, they kind of do. I mean, after reading the book, I would kind of consider Gary Vee to be a Stoic, actually, which is kind of interesting when you really think about it, because philosophers were often famous without the intention of being famous, really. They were often tied to government also. Not so much these days, but they were philosophers, Aristotle and Marcus Aurelius and all those people. Those were all Seneca. Those were all Stoic philosophers. So they have some interesting things that I think are worth talking about, and other things not so much. So let's go. So Stoicism has always fascinated me because I'm typically a person that almost by necessity has kind of had to shield a lot of my emotions over the course of my life, whether it's because of the crappy social expectation of men not being emotional or not being allowed to be emotional, quote unquote, or really not connecting with people on a deeper emotional level in the ways that I would like to. I've had select people throughout my life where I've been able to, but the average everyday person, like, I just don't feel comfortable doing that, really expressing myself and getting emotional. And I don't get emotional over things that, like, a lot of, I guess, average people, quote unquote, I guess, I don't know how else to put it. I don't get emotional over, like, animals or babies. I like babies, but and I think they're cute, but I don't, like, cry over them or anything. I just don't get emotional in a lot of ways that other people do. So I was kind of fascinated by Stoicism because my perception of it was that it was a deliberate way of life where you were devoid of all emotion and were able to, like, harness that in a positive way. But actually, after reading about it, I came to learn that Stoicism is actually more about embracing emotion and having control over it, and not necessarily devoiding yourself of it. It's like giving yourself into emotion in more appropriate moments, I suppose, is the best way to put it. And while I'm going to talk about this, I am not an expert. I'm just reiterating stuff that I read and can recall. So if you are interested, it's a really good book, The Art of Stoic Joy. Check it out. It's quite interesting. It's interesting from, like, a factual standpoint, like what these philosophies were, what the philosophers were, what their lives were like. Talks about many of them being exiled because of their perceptions of life and how they influence government and people and things like that. And all of that stuff is fascinating. So it's not really like, it's not a book that's trying to convince you to be a Stoic. It's a book that is, like, telling you about Stoicism and what it is and their philosophies. And maybe you could learn something from it, which is why I'm sharing this stuff, because I've learned a couple things. And so one main thing about Stoicism is that it is largely about finding ways to not disrupt your tranquility in life. You know, about making sure that you're not letting external things that you can't control bother you to the point where it's not allowing you to continue to live your life and enjoy the things you want to enjoy. You know, if somebody gets mad at you for, you know, accidentally cutting them off, and then they give you the finger, like, are you going to let that bother you all day long? It's almost like a logical, like, it doesn't make sense to allow you to be angry at that. Maybe a momentary thing, sure. Then you almost can feel some sense of empathy towards them, like, yeah, they got cut off, so I deserve that. It's cool. And then you move on. That's fine. So just, like, methods like that to allow yourself to just not disrupt your tranquility. It's like the same thing with, like, if a dog came and barked at you and didn't really like you, are you going to be upset all day that the dog didn't like you? Does it make sense to do that? I mean, to me, it doesn't make sense. To some people, they might allow that to happen. But I think that's weird, personally. So not letting things like that really get to you will allow you to experience more joy and more tranquility throughout your life. They equated it a bit to, like, Zen Buddhism, where Zen Buddhism is more of, like, an active separation of life, to stop yourself, stop everything, close your eyes, almost deactivate your brain, and focus on what is happening here and now. Don't think about the past, the future, whatever. Just live, just be. And you know, for Zen Buddhism, that's a very, like, separate act, and for Stoicism, it's more of an active act. It's more of a keeping your brain active throughout the day, but practicing a sense of zen to the point where like you're kind of constantly meditating and being aware of your surroundings and the people you're working with and talking to, and not allowing negative things to disrupt you throughout the day. So for that, I think it's fascinating.
If you've been dying to start that podcast about doves, or about your favorite jacket, or about a long-lost love, or a murder mystery about a cat who murdered everybody, you can start it now on Spotify for podcasters. I've been on Anchor for a long time, and now it is officially Spotify for podcasters, and it has been a platform that has been growing for forever. And I love it, and I still use it to this day, and it has hosted this podcast for 500 plus episodes now. So I highly recommend it. It is free to use. Spotify for Podcasters lets you record and edit podcasts right from your phone or computer. So no matter what your setup is like, you can start creating today. I'm literally on my bed recording on my, like the phone is on the bed, and I'm just talking, and it's not that complicated. And then you can distribute your podcast on Spotify and everywhere else that podcasts are heard. So video podcasts are available too if you want to show your pretty face and have people see you. And you can do all that too. So just do it. It's totally free. No catch. Give it a try. Spotify for podcasters. Let's go.
Another thing that's fascinating about the book is that it talks about the different philosophers and their different takes on Stoicism. Like, you can see that the philosophy itself was evolving based on what each philosopher thought was more successful than the previous or whatever. So you can see sort of the evolution of Stoicism, the changing. And it's not necessarily like this is better than the last one. It's almost like it's a different perspective or a different idea. So you can almost take like an idea from one of the previous Stoics and apply it to your life, as well as possibly a later one. So I think that's why it's fascinating. That's why it's not like a guidebook. It's like it's like just an informational, like this is what they were talking about sort of thing. One of the chapters that I found really, really interesting was about bullies and insults, which is what kind of led me to a previous podcast that I did that is titled that, Bullies and Insults, and how to deal with those people and those things, those situations where somebody is trying to berate you for who you are as a person. And sometimes there's some pretty easy ways to combat insults and bullies. One of those being to acknowledge whether or not what they're saying is true. Meaning, if like somebody's making fun of you for being bald, it's like, why would you be offended by that? Because that is what you are. It's almost like taking further ownership for that so no one can touch you. Like for me, I've been short all of my life. I'm 5'4", not a very tall guy. Just a little bit below average. But it is what it is. Like if somebody comes up to me and calls me like short fry or midget or little guy or something like that, I'm like, first of all, those words are hurtful. Second of all, I'm short. Like it doesn't, whatever. I don't care. It is what it is. I'm a short guy. I understand. That doesn't mean anything's wrong with me. If anything, I think it can prove a lot more about my character, that I can still do so many better things in life than someone who's tall and takes it for granted or something. Like it's stupid. It's one of those things that, like, if you are what they're saying you are, then okay. What are you getting at? So it's one of those things where like they can't touch you because of that. And another is the opposite truth, is if what they're saying is a blatant lie, then you can likely calmly set them straight, and it's not like often coming from a negative place. What I mean, it's like almost like a pure ignorant statement. A lot of stuff that's happening with like political stuff these days and people debating politics on the internet and whatnot, a lot of that comes from a place of ignorance, just not having experienced life from other people's perspectives, and not being aware of their own bias, which is a bigger thing. And I've been kind of avoiding that because it's a headache, but it's a very real thing that I dove into, and not proud of a lot of things I said during that time, but I'm also aware that a lot of people were just coming from a place of ignorance, not like negative ignorance, not like blatant ignorance, but just not knowing. So one way to combat that is to just kind of inform them, and if they're not willing to be informed, then you move on from them, however that may be. So I think there was one more method, but I can't really remember it. So for the most part, like, there are ways to not let people insult you by sort of like twisting logic and looking at whether something is blatantly true or not true, and coming at you that way. And then often looking at them and realizing that a lot of the times when they're projecting their anger or their insults at you, it is often a reflection of their own insecurity. You know, they're trying to bring you down to their level. They're trying to bring you down to the place that they feel that they're at. So if they feel insecure, I have often had trouble with male relationships because I'm short, so it feels like a lot of alpha male types, quote unquote, I should say like the guys that think they're alpha males, but not really, you know what I mean? Like the guys that are like really loud and boastful, they'll often come to me because I'm a short guy and feel like they can kind of run me over, and that never works. So sorry. It doesn't do anything to me. Like, I'm not bothered by that stuff. I'm not intimidated by people. So for that, you know, there's a couple ways to combat insults and bullies. The Stoics often talked about not coveting stuff, not longing for things. They would call it, what was it called actually? Something about natural needs versus unnatural needs. Meaning natural needs are water, food, air to breathe, shelter, things like that. Basic necessities, and often didn't even consider shelter as a necessity. Barely any clothes on your back, you know, very minimal in a lot of ways. I like things, so I don't really subscribe to that, but I also, at the same time, don't covet them in a way that if everything was gone, my life would not fall apart. I would find a way to rebuild. I would find a way back to where I would like to be. And I've done that before. When I moved from Philly, I pretty much came with not much, and sort of slowly rebuilt my life and what I wanted out of life, and allowed myself to reframe my life to this new one. So by not coveting stuff, you're really relinquishing the power that stuff has over you. Meaning, if you're not coveting the next iPhone, like, you're not going to spend $800 the next time the phone comes out and put yourself in a hole whether or not you're actually able to do that. Meaning, a lot of people will shell out $800 to $1,000 for the next iPhone even though they can't afford it, because it's just a habit or it's something that they become attached to. They covet it in a way that is unhealthy. They just want the next one. It doesn't matter if it's good. They just want it for like bragging rights or whatever unhealthy reasons. So unnatural needs are often things that can't be satiated. So that's the big difference. Natural things are like, you know, thirst can be quenched temporarily, but it can be quenched. Hunger can be quenched. But often worldly, unnatural possessions, man-made possessions, often lead people down a path of wanting more and more and more. And you feel like you get to a place where you're happy, or you're trying to strive for a certain level of having things or money, and you feel like that is the happiness goal, and you're actually not seeing the point of what makes people happy, and not exploring that. So often, by stripping themselves of material possessions, they would allow themselves to think about what it is in life that allows them to be happy people, or that can allow you to be a happy person with nothing. Because it's true, even today still, there's plenty of people who are poor and have nothing and are super happy, and there are people who have billions and are miserable, terrible people. You know, it's truth, you know. So it's about your perception of of things and the things you want in life, because you can be happy with nothing. If you've got like a good person next to you and friends and, you know, a good drink, like, what else do you need? At least that's for me. Like, I don't need much. I've thought about it all the time. And the Stoics often practice what is called, I can't remember the name of it actually, but I'm so terrible at remembering specifics. I'm so bad at school. They would practice like a negativity, like a looking at bad things happening in their lives and sort of analyzing how they would approach it. So what would happen if you got robbed? How would you approach that situation? How would you feel? And work through those emotions so that if it were to happen, you could better prepare yourself for that moment. Even something as deep as like your parents dying, like imagine that happening, and they would actively practice that. It kind of just happened to me because of my depression. My brain would just sometimes go there, and I would almost feel like I was forced to push through it and deal with it. And it's not in a way to make it easier to go to your parents' funeral. It's a way of practicing and appreciating what you have now. Because sometimes people don't think about mortality. They think everything's going to last forever. And by practicing more that negative practice of thinking about the death of a loved one or the passing of something or the finishing of something, you can better appreciate it in the now. Sometimes that leads people down a rabbit hole, but I think it's interesting. So there are some interesting things about Stoicism, but I also encourage you to check out the book, and if you're interested in it, I think there's a lot of other great topics. But there are also some things that I don't necessarily agree with that are interesting about Stoicism. You know, it almost can be. Sometimes it sort of goes towards that cliche of what Stoicism is, like, you know, being too stiff and not really experiencing life. Like, being happy with less is good, but I think also we should allow ourselves to experience more. You know, we should be able to go on trips and experience different parts of the world. We should be able to, you know, have sex without feeling guilty about it, meaning they would often talk about only having sex for reproductive purposes, which I think is, I guess, better than other people. But at the same time, I don't know, if you're dedicating yourself to a person, you should be able to enjoy the physical pleasures of each other. So I don't really see that as like a thing to subscribe to. I think that doesn't make sense to me. And there are plenty of other things where they sort of like deprive themselves of joy. But at the same time, I think it's good in practice occasionally. Like, I think as a form of discipline, like maybe practice celibacy for a little while. Maybe not when you're married, because that might not lead to a happy relationship. but if you're like on your own and you were like promiscuous for a while or something, and you're like, you know, for the sake of discipline, you know, going celibate for a while, or you know, changing your diet for a while, or, you know, doing something that sort of tests your discipline. I think that stuff's kind of interesting. I kind of did that as a kid, where I would test how long I could, like, kind of endurance tests of like holding an ice cube and seeing how long I can deal with it and not be miserable. it's kind of a version of that. I think that's kind of interesting. So, what else? There was one other thing about like death that I thought was fascinating, that they talked about when you're close to death, and because you've been, as a practicing Stoic, quote unquote, you would likely be thinking about death quite often, actually, thinking about the death of loved ones or your own death, and thinking about mortality and using that as fuel or a springboard to appreciate more things in life. And thinking about when you're getting closer to death. A lot of Stoics often would commit suicide close to the end of their lives, because they felt like it was a matter of like taking control and not trying to let something run its course beyond, you know, what was like helpful, I guess you could say. They would often just sort of like end the suffering kind of early, because it was a matter of taking control. It's kind of a weird, interesting topic. Not saying it's a good thing or really a bad thing. I don't know. That's a gray area. I'd lean closer to a bad thing. I think you should try everything you can to feel better. But it's fascinating to read about. I think it's interesting perspectives that I think a lot of people don't consider these days. But the big things that really stuck out to me as positives were the not letting things affect you, the tranquility side. It's interesting. After you read the book or after you listen to this podcast, watch some of Gary Vee's videos, and you can see, like, I don't know, he seems like he's a Stoic to me, like he's a modern day Stoic and doesn't really know it. that rhymed. And he's a person that doesn't let negative things affect him. He's always driven. He's always he's talking about, like, you're going to die, that death aspect, being aware of his mortality. He's very philosophical and preacher-like, and he's in the public eye without really, like, trying to be, I guess. I mean, he kind of is trying to be, but it's sort of just a side effect of who he is as a person, which I think is parallel to a lot of the philosophers and stuff. So a lot of that stuff is kind of fascinating and really interesting. So I don't know if you're interested in it. It's the Ancient Art of Stoic Joy. Check it out. And this has been the podcast. So on that note, check me out at Rival My Design on social channels and leave some call-ins. I'll talk to you later.